Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you today. And thank you for Nico for warming up the topic so well for me. What I'm hoping to do is follow on rather than repeat some of Nico's points and also maybe address some of the questions that were raised just after the last presentation. Just by way of background, my name is Dean Plumb. I work for British Airways. And the reason we thought it would be useful for us to give you a perspective from an airline operating out of Heathrow is that we too face many noise challenges. Heathrow is one of the most, in fact, is the most noise-affected airport in the whole of Europe. It's also the busiest airport in terms of operations and passenger numbers. So we have some significant challenges as well. By way of context for British Airways, we operate about 50% of all the slots at Heathrow. We have further operations at London City, which you heard mentioned earlier. That's got some particular operational challenges, and whilst noise doesn't lead to the steep approaches, we routinely fly 5.5 degree steep approaches, but with heavily modified 318 aircraft. We've also got a significant presence at Gatwick Airport, but actually Heathrow is quite clearly our main hub. We operate a fleet of around about 240 aircraft and approximately 300,000 flights globally. We've got a destination range of 160 different destinations. And for me, this really captures what the challenge is for global airlines. We are competing in a global market. We have to run an operation which not only takes account of noise restrictions and operating restrictions at our home base, but also at the 160 global destinations that we fly to. In many ways, our schedulers will tell you that when you take the restrictions at the departure points, layer on top of those the restrictions at your own hub airport, the program writes itself. There is very little flexibility for us to be able to change and optimize our operations. Heathrow, it's important that I give you some context on Heathrow before I continue. So as you know, Heathrow is situated just to the west of London. It has an incredibly large noise-affected population. This, in many ways, provides geographical constraints on the airport as well. As you know, Heathrow Airport is working at maximum capacity. It's currently capped at 480,000 movements, but routinely the capacity of the airport, I should say, on an annual basis is operating at 99% capacity. So here at Frankfurt, you have about 25 to 30% spare capacity. So if there's fog in the morning or if there's bad weather, you can recover. However, at Heathrow, literally the wind just needs to change direction and the departure direction needs to change from east to west, and the natural delay you get through that runway change of direction will lead to delays which are potentially unrecoverable through the day. There's some other problems that's presented by the capacity challenge at Heathrow, and that is any form of disruption means that we are faced with either cancelling a flight or delaying it into the night period. We do not have the opportunity to reschedule that flight into what is a full program the next day. So for us, in many occasions, if we have disruption through weather or other issues, operational issues at Heathrow, we are forced to operate later into the evening, and that can lead to some late and unwelcome night flights. Now, a recent survey by the CAA and Heathrow Airport as well has shown that since Terminal 5 opened and the efficiency of the airport has improved, actually those delayed flights have reduced in number. But what we are faced with if we have to cancel a flight is that because we can't reschedule it into the next day's operation, it can take up to 5 to 6 days before all of those passengers can be reaccommodated onto spare seats on existing flights. So actually the capacity problem has a huge impact for our passengers. Now the pressures at Heathrow are so substantial that plans for expansion have been long talked about. You will be aware that the recent decision by the UK government to cancel a third runway has led to some further discussion about how the UK deals with the hub capacity challenge. The Davis Commission has been launched in order to answer this very difficult challenge. And the problem that the Davis Commission are going to face is whether to expand Heathrow or to look at hub capacity at some alternative locations. I just want to focus on the size of the noise challenge at Heathrow before I go on. And this is really just to underline the point that we as aircraft operators, and indeed Heathrow Airport as well, recognise the impact of noise on the local community. So we point to this chart on a frequent basis. Heathrow is the most noise-affected airport in the whole of Europe. These are the 55 LDEN noise contours produced centrally in Europe on a 5-year basis. They're just about to be renewed, but these are the latest figures I have. And you can see from the chart that over 725,000 people fall within the 55 LDEN contour. Now, you have to add together the next 5 largest noise-affected populations at other airports in Europe to even match the size of the Heathrow noise-affected population. So we recognise we have a very significant issue here. There's one other point that is very stark on this chart, is that 3 of the top most noise-affected airports in the whole of Europe are in the UK. So actually it's a function of being a small island and a large population and potentially having links to far-flung places in the world, both through economic links and historical links, that we are forced into this situation where we have such a large noise-affected population. But noise contours tell another very interesting story. The UK government's view on where the onset of annoyance, significant annoyance, comes in is the 57 LEQ noise contour. And if you look at the green contour, that's the figures for 1991, and the blue contour are the figures for 2009. And what you'll see is that those contours have shrunk by 52%. Now, that's despite a significant increase in movements as well. Now, I would argue that this is because of the delivery of new technology and investment from airlines. So the industry has delivered a 52% reduction in the noise contours. Now, you've heard mentioned the balanced approach earlier on this morning. And, of course, I know that's a concept that's well understood. Number 2 on that list of approaches to noise management is land use planning. And again, I would argue that actually this is a function that can only really sit with with central government in terms of general guidance and with local governments in terms of application. But for me, it's very, very clear that central government must provide guidance. The problem we face at Heathrow is that over the same period that the industry has reduced those noise contours, a positive decision to build over 13,000 extra homes has been taken for just the blue contour, the 2009 contour. So faster than the airlines and indeed the industry can reduce the contours, extra homes have been built close to the airport. Now, for me, the question is simple, and I know what I feel the answer is to this. But do we have a noise problem or don't we have a noise problem? If we do have a noise problem, then we need to be doing something far more creative and showing far greater leadership on land use planning if we're not to undermine the developments and the progress that is being delivered by the industry. Now, I'm not trying to claim that the industry washes up really clean here, but it's obvious that performance has improved. And yet land use planning has not stopped population encroachment in towards the airports. So I want to focus a little bit now on the actual way that noise is managed at Heathrow, because I think this is one of the key drivers for why and how we select our aircraft. Noise, particularly night noise, is managed under the quota count system, and this system describes both a movement limit and also a maximum amount of noise energy that can be emitted. And that's both on an individual movement basis, but also across a season in terms of an overall season budget. This is a process that has many virtues. First of all, it's simple. Secondly, it provides a natural incentive for airlines to reduce the noise of their operations and employ quieter aircraft, because the seasonal budget over the life of the regime is continually reduced. The other advantage here is that the long-term stability in noise regulation that the manufacturers are craving is provided by guidance such as this. And you heard the example given earlier about how the A380 was refined in order to meet the QC system requirements at Heathrow. Now, we have an incredible position of power of noise over the influence of aircraft design here. And my question again, to follow on from Nico's challenge, is where do we get the right balance? Because every single A380 aircraft, for the 25-year lifespan of that individual aircraft, across the 10 to 15 hours of each flight, is now going to burn extra fuel. Now, the last time I looked, and I've heard mention of it several times this morning, whilst we've made great progress in climate change, the climate change challenge, we still have the biggest impact of aviation is climate change. So we have a very interesting balance to strike between carbon emissions and between noise reduction. Now, to answer that other rhetorical question I asked earlier, I happen to believe, as a noise manager probably would do, that noise is a very significant issue that we must address. But we must get this balance right. We must be very careful to try to make sure that we're not compromising or overly focusing on one area. Just a couple more items on the night QC system at Heathrow. And before I go any further, the reason I focus so much on the QC system and why it's figured so prominently in our discussions about exactly what aircraft types might meet our needs for the future is that there is potential for a system such as this, because of its simplicity and because of its effectiveness, to be extended to operate throughout the day, to potentially describe a maximum number of movements and a maximum noise value for every single operation throughout the day. So we're very interested in making sure that we are driven by the QC system. There is no formal night ban at Heathrow. What there is a number of operating restrictions. We cannot schedule QC4 aircraft into the night. Some operational flights can take place if there have been delays. But there is also a very long-standing voluntary arrangement which is complied by all of the airlines, which is to ensure that there are no early morning arrivals before 04:30 in the morning. Now, I'll say that again, that's 04:30. Now, that's still very early, and that is when really the operations at Heathrow start, and very soon after that become more intense. And the challenge we face is that we are operating in a global market. The centre of gravity for the world's economy has shifted east. We need to be able to access, for the benefit of the whole European economy, we need to be able to facilitate travel between Europe and the growing markets of the Far East and possibly Latin America as well. There are a number of markets around the world that we simply can't serve unless we have flexibility in terms of the times of our operations. So you can tell that we're torn because we have a desire to reduce our noise impact, but we have a very clear opportunity and need to be able to service these far-flung markets. So as an example, for British Airways, we fly two of our very key services from Hong Kong. Our aircraft take off as late as is possible. It's very close to midnight from Hong Kong. They fly as slowly as possible. Approximately 60% of our aircraft fly at absolute minimum speed coming back to the UK, and yet we still find that we're arriving in London at around about 4:30. So we have a real challenge. So an aircraft destined for Frankfurt, touching down at exactly the same point, will of course, with the time change, be touching down at 5:30, and so we have a geographical and time zone disadvantage as well. I won't dwell on this too much. I think you've already heard the principle, but every time that you drop a QC banding, the reduction is 3 decibels, and that represents a halving of noise energy, and is also the point at which you can perceive a reduction in noise. But I thought this might be a little bit more interesting for you in terms of being able to put into context how the QC system is reflected in terms of our current fleet and the replacement fleet that we're now acquiring. So on the left, the 747 has an arrival QC rating of 2, very clearly in that band. But the aircraft that's largely replacing, or certainly we've got 12 on order, is the A380, and it has a quarter of the noise energy of a 747-400. The manufacturers on both sides of the Atlantic have done a really great job for us, because also when you look at the 767 and compare it to the 787-8, which is the smallest of the 787 aircraft, the 787-8 comes in at an incredible quarter QC. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that is a wide-body, long-haul aircraft which is capable of very long ranges, and it is as quiet on arrival as the quietest of our smallest short-haul aircraft. So these are really incredible advances in terms of noise performance that are being delivered into our fleet at the moment. As you might expect, in terms of departure, the engines are at higher thrust, so the QC ratings are higher. And for the 747, it jumps up quite clearly to the top end of the QC4 bracket. Now, again, this points to the fact that there's a very natural incentive for airlines at Heathrow not to have delayed flights into the night period. So if you imagine a flight that was due to take off at 10 o'clock outside of the night quota period and is delayed into the night quota period, it will use a precious night jet movement slot, and it will use 4 quota points. Now, that's a really big burn rate for us by comparison to what we were planning. But we've also got a challenge in terms of our transition to the quieter aircraft, the A380, the 787, and the A350. Because while we're in that transition, and it may take up to 10 years, we have the problem of what happens if an A380 goes unserviceable, has a technical challenge, and we need to replace, we'll put another aircraft on that service to replace the service. Now, our standby aircraft is a 747, so we have more passengers. We have 469 passengers on an A380. The 747 can take maybe 350, so we've got a QC2 aircraft being replaced by a QC4 aircraft, and we might even need 2 aircraft to be able to cope with the passenger load. So actually, during that transition, we need some flexibility in terms of our ability to be able to swap in some of the noisier standby aircraft. We don't want to use them as the first port of call for our operation, but sometimes we're going to need to fall back on them. Again, here you can see the really great performance of the 787-8, but we should be recognizing that the A380 has a very different seating capacity and is a very different type of flight mission by comparison to the 787. I thought this might bring some of the discussion into context for us. On the left-hand side, you can see the number of, the noise grating according to certificated noise levels. But along the bottom axis, you can see the seat capacity. So I believe earlier, one of my learned friends said, heavier aircraft, bigger aircraft can't be quieter. Well, I think this slide probably disproves that. Because the A380 clearly has got a much higher capacity, but is clearly much quieter. The 787, which you can see down in the bottom left-hand side of the picture, is comparable to a short-haul aircraft. And what you really get a sense of here is that one of the big challenges for an airline, and the only way we can survive economically as an airline, is to put an aircraft that is the right size for the demand on a route between 2 cities. If we put a very large aircraft on, we will lose money. The airline will go bust, and that's not good for anybody. I'd like to say that British Airways, like Lufthansa, we regard ourselves as good neighbours. We want to be doing the right thing in terms of our noise impacts. but it doesn't serve anybody in this room if we can't compete on a global basis, or if we're forced to use the wrong aircraft on the wrong routes. But this chart for me gives great hope, because we have both high capacity for routes such as Hong Kong that we can apply the A380 to, but also the 787, which has a smaller capacity and allows us to open up new routes, open up new possibilities to some of these growing markets that haven't yet been developed in maybe Latin America, in Africa, and in the Far East. I think it's also interesting to just look at the ranges of these aircraft by comparison to the seat and noise factors as well. So not only do we have quieter aircraft coming through, but if you look at the latest aircraft, both the A380 and the 787, the 787-9 has a range of just short of 16,000 kilometers. It's exactly the same as the A380. Suddenly, our aircraft are not only much quieter, not only much better tailored towards the seating capacity that we need to be able to put onto routes, but they also have the legs to be able to reach a much wider global market, which again brings economic wealth back into Europe. This chart was referred to earlier. I might quiz some people in the audience just to see if you were paying attention earlier. But the key message here is that sustainable aviation produced what was a world first, a noise roadmap. We've seen carbon roadmaps, but this is a very detailed and sophisticated attempt, largely due to the great efforts of the manufacturers in terms of modelling, to show what the future would look like on a UK basis. But it's also taken a menu approach which will allow us to adopt these principles to any airport, but largely with forecast growth in demand, which is based on government forecasts, and some conservative views on future technology. We can potentially reduce noise further than today's levels. So really there's potential for at least maintaining our current noise, if not improving it. The really key question, what's driving an airline to choose different aircraft types? And I've got potentially a challenging question for you as an audience. I've mentioned already how important it is to match capacity to the future demand that we expect to see around the world. But with aging aircraft come problems when you compare them to the other likely products on the market. So fuel efficiency is very important. The IATA, which is the International Trade Association for Airlines, have published figures that say, generally speaking, fuel is about 1/3 of the operating costs of every route. 1/3 of the operating costs of every route. Now this for me really kind of puts into perspective when we talk about increasing differential landing charges at airports, about the effectiveness of that as a move and as a measure. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Clearly, we've got to be able to access the aircraft. Manufacturers are investing a lot of money into the production lines, and each aircraft costs an awful lot to make. So quite clearly, there's limited capacity. So airlines need to queue up and acquire the best slots, production slots, to be able to acquire new aircraft. Also, as aircraft get older, maintenance costs go up, and we start getting concerned about, is this aircraft going to be obsolete in terms of being able to operate to various airports around the world? And actually, the issue of noise is a very strong, noise regulation is a very strong signal to airlines here. And again, is the reason that I think that the quota count system at Heathrow has been the most significant driving force for us as an airline in terms of the noise aspects of our airline acquisition. It goes without saying that the state of the economy is very important to us. So the worldwide demand needs to be there, but also a local demand in Europe and in London is very important. But that also affects our ability to finance aircraft. Now, we heard mention of just how expensive each airframe is and of Lufthansa's investment plans. I'll talk a little bit about ours at the moment, but let's bear in mind that every single A380 has a list price of $400 million. That's an incredible cost per unit. And to be able to work in such a, I'm sure nobody will cry for us airlines in the room, but we do operate on very small profit margins. So we need to be able to operate these aircraft for a very long time. And the average for Heathrow is a fleet life of about 22 to 23 years. Globally, that's around about 25 years. So actually, when we bought our 747-400s and took the delivery of the last one in around about the year 2000, they were the best aircraft available on the market for that seating capacity. Right now, the 747-400 is the noise dominant type at Heathrow, and the youngest of our airframes is only halfway through its economic life. And yet we are receiving calls for the accelerated retirement of that aircraft, despite the underlying economics being very difficult for us. Now, over the last 5 years, it won't have escaped your attention that finance on a global level has been very difficult to achieve. So if one aircraft costs $400 million, imagine what rolling an entire fleet is going to be like. And when we go to the bank manager and ask for a loan, he wants to know that we are a sound, solvent business and that we'll be able to repay these loans and be a secure person to lend the money to over long periods. So actually, the challenge for us and most airlines over the last 5 years has been able to tap in and find finance and to demonstrate that we're sound businesses. These are our fleet replacement plans for British Airways. So on order at the moment, we've got 12 A380s. We've got 3 already. We've also got 2 787s. We've already spoken about the noise performance of these aircraft. We've also got 42 787s on order and another 18 A350s. So really substantial investment plans. The way that's going to change the balance of our fleet over the period up to 2020. Sorry, it's a slightly busy graph, but on the left-hand axis, you can see the QC ratings, QC4, 2, etc. And each of the bars represents at the top 2013, 2015, and then 2020 for each of those QC ratings. And the message to take away from this is that for departure QC, as an example, our QC4 departures are going to erode really quite significantly by 2020, and there's going to be a very significant increase in QC 0.5 in terms of our fleet disposition. It's been mentioned several times this morning that not only purchasing quiet aircraft is important, but actually operational procedures are absolutely vital. And I think we've just merely scratched the surface, and we had some great presentations earlier which talked about some of the possibilities for the future. British Airways has run over 60 simulator approaches where we examined steep approaches, delaying a landing gear, and reduced landing flap. And we've actually already employed delayed landing gear procedures for the last 18 months on our fleets, operating globally, actually, so it's a standard for us. So we're really pleased that we were able to get something constructive out of that. And I'd like to emphasize that there's been no prize for us in doing that. The only prize has been that we were able to turn around to rooms such as yourselves and to say we had never stopped trying to improve our noise performance. There's been no financial benefit, there's been no other benefit for us. We've just been keeping the continuous improvement on noise performance. But airlines need to be able to invest expensive pilots into expensive simulators for long periods of time to be able to test procedures. There is also a raft of work at ICAO, which was discussed earlier, which requires support. And I was one of the team that helped contribute in a small way to the Chapter 14 noise standard that was agreed in the last CAPE cycle. Now, all of that requires collaboration from the industry and resource from the industry. And yet, let's think back to post-September the 11th, when actually we were just worried about surviving as airlines. Our resource to be able to contribute to such activities was greatly reduced. So my challenge to the discussion that we're having today is actually, if we increase punitive charges then we reduce the financial ability of airlines to both provide people resource, simulator resource, and also investment into some of the retrofits that were described earlier. And actually, my favourite approach, and one that I think is demonstrably more effective based on my experience over the last 10 years in the UK, is that if we work in collaboration, rather than trying to drive the manufacturers to do X, force airlines to do Y, the conversation is very blame-driven. And actually, I think a collaboration bringing together the experience of airlines, the knowledge of the manufacturers, and actually the knowledge and experience of the local communities is where we will reach the high ground in terms of future performance. So my challenge to you is to discuss and think about whether we think that differential noise charges are actually, and potentially fines if they're at a punitive level, actually erode an airline's ability to be able to engage in noise performance improvements, or whether they actually send a very strong signal about the intent of the local population in the airport to minimise noise impacts. And I think it's pretty clear what my view on that is, but I'm very happy to hear other views.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Plumb. And we have some minutes for questions. So please, questions or comments, everything over there, please. Wait. Mr. Anton with the electric plane.
Hello, my name is Ewald Anton. You were talking about the approaches and also to reduce, to land with alternate flaps and other procedures to reduce the noise. You did talk about departures. What is your acceleration, or when do you usually make the cutback? When do you accelerate? What is the procedure with your company?
Yes, at Heathrow we use, for our 747s, which are more noise affected, have a larger noise footprint, we use an adapted procedure where we cut back at 1,500 feet and climb to 4,000 feet before then accelerating further. But that's just for that aircraft type. But we do use 1,000 foot for the rest of our fleet as the cutback and a standard climb out. And that's based on the noise impacts of the 747 being much greater.
Okay, one further question over there, please.
Daniel Schad, Austro Control from Vienna. Knowing that British Airways is one of the few airlines in Europe, maybe the only one still using MLS, the microwave landing system, I was wondering why that failed. I mean, a couple of years ago, this was always the technology quoted as having a potential for curved approaches and things like that. And it has come totally out of the focus. And I was wondering why British Airways didn't push any further for the use of that system, because your aircraft are equipped.
Yes, it's a good question. We felt as if we pushed quite hard just to get MLS onto the aircraft, and I think this is one of you know, there's a cautionary tale here that technology can actually take up an awful lot of resource as well. So MLS seem to offer us some great operational flexibility, but in some ways potentially it's been overtaken by RNAV, BRNAV and GBAS approaches, which are even more flexible but are much more widespread and available in terms of aircraft equipment. So I think we've been overtaken by events.
Okay, thank you very much, Captain Plumb. And we come to the last presentation.